in the driveway. It ain't mine.
Behind me is a mural on the 1910's Garage Museum. I did this mural about 20 years ago, and about every 4 or 5 years I come up and refresh this mural for the museum. Following these shots out here, you'll see a lot of the stuff that's inside the museum. And then when we get finished here today, we'll be running just about 3-4 blocks over to, actually it's right over here, is the jailhouse, the historical jailhouse where Charlie Berger was hanged. Until dead, they said. The reason for that is they had to have 3 doctors sign the death certificate. He was kind of a famous gangster here during the Prohibition era and before that, here in Southern Illinois, and this was the last hanging performed here in Southern Illinois. Was done here in Franklin County. But this is a shot of the mural that I do. This was all done with spray cans. I'm an airbrush artist, but something this big we just do with spray bomb. And it's kind of like a classy graffiti if you want to look at it that way, but it was done to look like it was done on the back side of an old barn.
So welcome to the 1910's Franklin County Garage Museum. This is the second project of the Franklin County Historic Preservation Society. We completed the jail in about 96, started in 93 and opened in 96. Then in 1999, a gentleman by the name of Anton Thoman, who had closed this building, he was in his 80s, 10 years prior, made this building available. And what's unique about it is this is the first Ford franchise in Franklin County, Illinois. The building was built in 1910, and it's a barrel top building, which is pretty unique. But it has the fact that most of the things you see here, the signage, the tools, have never left the building. And we have an upstairs storage area that has all kinds of parts for various cars. So it was now the office for the Benton West City Chamber of Commerce, and Franklin County Historic Preservation Society maintains the automobiles and the museum aspect of this building. However, we physically had a hands-on part in restoring this. We went out and got a tourism attraction grant for $50,000, approached the city. They had a contribution which we made in kind with local donations, and then we at a yet much younger age came up and spent every Saturday for 2 years making this a reality. So as I said, it was Benton and Franklin County. This was the fastest growing area east of the Mississippi River for 10 years following the discovery of the rich coal reserves in 1901, with Benton going from 3,000 to 10,000 and West Frankfort going from non-existent to 20,000. So this was the place to be. This is where the jobs were. It all concurred with Henry Ford figuring out, not inventing the automobile, but inventing a way, or coming up with a way to have an assembly line where the average American could afford to buy an automobile, and along with the paving of the roads and electricity and all the other modernizations. So this was not only servicing Benton, Illinois, but it was a hub for Ziegler, Thompsonville, several other areas, and the cars, Model Ts, came in on crates. The Illinois Central Railroad, when they got a call from the train station, all hands would go down and get the crates out, and we have some of the tools up on the wall in various places. And Mr. Thoman was the grandson, actually the son of the chief mechanic, who came here when the DeMond brothers opened it in 1910 as a garage. So he'd heard from his father, and he knew what everything was and what its place was. So they'd go down and they'd take these crates out, and you can Google what a Model T crate looks like. It has the car, the wheels, the fenders. They get it assembled enough, take a funnel, put some gas in it, and bring it over and put it in a huge field over here outside the building. Then they would distribute this. So this is not only a Ford franchise, but one of the largest in Illinois. And so we have 3 of the different eras of Model Ts. They started making them in 1908, 1909, and then they had what's called the brass era. So we have this 1914 that's that's an actual brake testing machine. Before they had hydraulic brakes, each brake had to be adjusted separately, which is quite a deal. It's a 1914 brass era, and then we have this 1912, which is actually the very chassis of this car was owned by Charlie Berger. And the gentleman who has this car on loan, or his family has it on loan now, is one of the co-founders of the, he's Frank Bailey, one of the co-founders of the Hucks stores. They had Martin and Bailey, then the Hucks stores. When we started the museum, I was doing a Berger presentation, and he said, I have that chassis. He bought a Ford dealership in Carmi, and part of the negotiation was when Charlie made it big and left Ledford, he had a Model T that he had in Ledford, and this gentleman who sold the Ford franchise had that running gear, and then Mr. Bailey took it and made a Huckster wagon out of it and had it in parades and so forth. So that's a 1912 Huckster. And so these are the brass era. This one over here is a 26, and it's a post-brass era. But the big difference between the two is these brass era cars had the fuel tank underneath the seat. You lift up the driver's seat and there's a fuel tank, which worked fine until you went uphill. But since it was gravity fed in an area that had hills like Johnson County, you would have to back the car up to keep the fuel going down to the motor. And then it had, instead of electric lamps, it had carbide, which is like a minor carbide lamp. It produces the gas, and you'd have to light those. And they weren't much good for navigating, but they said a horse could see it and not come over and rub its buggy into you. And then the headlights over there, and then the running lights. And then it only had a crank start only. It did not have electric. And by 1926, plus everybody says, well, I hear you could buy a Model T in any color you liked, as long as it was black. And they broke that code in 1926 because they were competing with Chevrolet and all the other automakers, and people wanted a fancier, more colorful car. So you could buy, in that year, the coupe in this green. They also made a Windsor maroon. There were 3 colors you could buy, and nickel-plated headlights. But the big deal here was that gas tank is up in the cowl, that area just right behind the hood, and you could actually go uphill without starving the motor out for fuel, because it was at an angle where the motor would get the fuel. It had standard electric headlights, and while it has a crank in the front, it had an optional electric start, but it was not reliable enough with a 6-volt battery to give up the crank start. Now the crank start, if you knew not how to crank it, you could break your thumb and your forearm in one swoop, because you had a spark advance that had to be set just right. So in 1916, the DeMonds brothers, who were big land developers and had interest in coal mines, decided that they would trade their Ford franchise and sell it and go for 3 other brands. And those 3 brands were Oakland, which is the forerunner to Pontiac, Chevrolet, and then a car called the J. Dallas Dort. And that in the corner is a 1916 J. Dallas Dort. We were lucky to find one. I don't believe it was one that was sold here, but the frames to this car, it was a very popular car in Canada. And another collection out in San Silver, California is one of the largest, the Max Factor collection. And they have a 1916 J. Dallas Dort exactly like this one. So I know it's a rare automobile. It had a Westinghouse electrical system. And unlike the Model Ts that had a system of canvas bands for transmission, this actually, just like the later Model A Fords, an actual gear transmission. The people were to the point where they weren't satisfied with just a utilitarian automobile. They were wanting something more colorful, something faster, and more powerful. So then we have, here's a 1928 Chevrolet, and a person from McLeansboro who visited, named Bill Barnes, had visited the museum. He had an entire collection of automobiles, and after he died, we got a call from his estate, and he wanted to donate this to the museum. For 2 or 3 years in a row, think of this, Franklin County, with all the good paying coal mining jobs, this was the largest Chevrolet franchise in the state of Illinois for 3 years. Not consecutive years, but for 3 years. Sold more automobiles, Chevrolets. This one is a 26 Hutmobile that a gentleman in Benton owns. And when we created the museum, It's a win-win because people need a place that is humidity controlled, has protection to keep their cars, and we have a waiting line of people who would love to store a vintage appropriate automobile in this space, and people are afraid to take their cars out because they're afraid they're going to lose their space.
Yeah.
Our museum.
I can understand that.
This is like a nursing home.
It'd be a nice place to have. It'd be a nice deal to be able to put my bikes up in.
Oh yeah.
Nice climate controlled area.
Right.
I tell you what, the thing that interests me is I didn't even realize it until you mentioned it that this was a Chevrolet.
Right.
And a lot of people don't understand. They see this style was typical to a lot of hot rods. All the 36 and 37, 34 Fords were all hot rodded.
Yeah, it's a popular body style.
And-
Of course, you buy those in fiberglass now.
Yeah, but this was the Chevrolet of that era. And I guess the main thing that just brings the whole difference to it is this. You never see that on the Fords.
Right.
So,
And this is not a rumble seat. I wish we had the rumble seat. That's just a simple.
yeah, that's what I was wondering if that was a rumble seat, but that's just a trunk.
Unless it is, and I forgot that. I'd have to get the key to get it. No,
Nope, just a trunk.
just a trunk.
Looks like it's got part or most of the original jack in there.
I would say it is.
And there's a,
Rumble seat would
Tire.
actually open that way, so I should have figured that out.
I would imagine that's not too difficult to change on the road.
And one thing we do with all of our cars, you notice we get the weight up on the frame to get the wheels, because these wooden spokes just can't.
Oh yeah, I hadn't noticed that.
Then they always go flat. They don't look right. So
Yeah,
get them up on jacks and they'll stay for years. So the Hucks car, the Frank Bailey who owns it, would come here periodically. And he had one rule, and that is every 6 months I had to take that crank and turn it 360 degrees to lubricate that motor. So Frank's been gone for probably 10 years now. But I can assure you every 6 months, his son comes in when he's going on his way back to Carmel to make sure that we have done that. Because it keeps the motor lubricated.
yeah, yeah. Works the oil pump a little bit and moves it around the motor just a touch. I think I'd go more than 360 degrees, but
Well, I turned over a couple of times just to make sure. And of course, here's a series of the burger hanging, but what's unique, you see a lot of our visitors, this is adjacent to or within 2 blocks of the jail museum, so they've heard of the burger theme or vice versa, and this connects with that, plus it's a Model T. And then over here, this is an extension of our Beatles 1963 George Harrison visit. This is the AM transmitter, and that's the beacon up on the tower. Federal Aviation Administration requires that Boeing clearance. But this thing was so big and so heavy and so powerful, so many watts running through it. But a AM transmitter now looks like the CPU for a computer. You can pick it up, it's nothing. But this is that early technology.
yeah.
Here's a picture of Louise as a young girl. She's now in her 90s, and with her family. And
George and Ringo.
that's George and Ringo there. And she was with her brother George, and that's their family at a younger age. And this is interesting. I'm going to pick this up at the other museum. This is over in front of the pizza, Joe's Pizza on East Main Street in Benton. It's modified now.
Right.
That would be Joe's Pizza.
Right.
So she lived down by the Benton High School, and this is George's brother, Peter. Ringo was going to come. They call it a holiday or a vacation. And they all decided to go somewhere. But he was the first Beatle to visit the United States of America. What's interesting is that goat, and that's his niece, and that's Louise, of course. But the narrative that the Beatles wanted to have was the fact that they were famous in England. Then they all came over to New York. Then they all appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and none of them had been to the United States before.
Right.
They were
Right.
British invasion. And that went against the narrative of George saying, hey,
But he was actually here in 63, right?
63.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's February 64. They
Was
appeared on the Ed Sullivan
Yeah,
Show.
it was the Ed Sullivan Show. Yeah, her, I guess Louise's husband worked for old Ben.
No, Freeman United Coal.
Freeman
West
United.
Frankfort. Right. He was an engineer.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, let's face it, England is coal. And so was Southern Illinois.
Yeah.
So for someone, I cannot tell you, I was only 12 years old when he visited, which was ancient, but I had never witnessed a person with an English dialect or speaking that with an English accent before that. I think she was the only English person living in Benton. So it just so happens that her brother happens to be one of the 4 Beatles.
Yeah.
How ironic.
Well, we all started somewhere.
That's right.
Everybody who's famous was not famous at one point.
Right.
So
But you could not become, the Beatles are voted, even if you don't like music, the top icons of the last century. The way we think, our politics, the way we dress, everything is influenced by the Beatles. No question.
yeah, by the Beatles and all the blues and stuff born down at the Delta and all that stuff. And that's what our situation is about. You know, we're doing these shows for motorcycle, car, travel enthusiasts, music enthusiasts. Both myself, my brother are musicians, and Bob here is a musician as well. And the fellow over the Wren Lake, which we're going to do some filming at here in a little bit, is a musician as well. So
One of the most famous musicians from Southern Illinois, the
Yeah.
Egyptian Combo.
he was Rick Linton from the Egyptian Combo, one of the famous groups out of Southern Illinois. Of course, we've had quite a few famous musicians come out of Illinois, right out of this area, including this county, as well as Doug Supernaw and Bruce Brown, who played with Charlie Daniels. He played with Mel McDaniels for 10 years. Then he went to Charlie Daniels.
How about Dust on the Bottle?
And David Lee Murphy.
David Lee Murphy.
And there's been more. There's quite a few musicians throughout Southern Illinois that have made big time. Wouldn't want to forget Kendall Marvel, famous songwriter. He's got a bunch of number ones under his belt. He does a lot of writing with Chris Stapleton.
And Billy Graham, not to be confused with the preacher Billy Graham, who was a member of the Grand Ole Opry, who was extremely famous in the early 50s. Was from Franklin County.
Yeah, so this is a highly music-involved area. And we'll see you outside in a minute to finish up this partial episode. We want to... I do a mural outside this building on the side of the building, which acts as a sign for the building, and it's reminiscent of the old barn signs that you've seen on barns. And we're going to show off that a little bit. I do that for the Historical Society every year.
Well, I can add to that. So there had been a building adjacent to this building that had been torn down, so we just had an exposed brick wall. Then we came up with the idea, well, what about a mural? So David, thank you for coming up with the idea. We stuccoed that wall, and if you drive through our town and miss that wall, you need to turn in your driver's license, because you see it, it's huge, and it's right on the main street when you come around the square. But he put a 1910 Model T and the 1910's Garage Museum, and with the old-time lighting, in fact. But not only that, but I think he freshened it up 3 times since over the past 20 years.
Yeah, once every 4 or 5 years I come in and just refreshen all the paint because the sun beats it down. And we'll get you a shot of that in a moment. And the thing is we'll just try to add some life to some places that were sitting around empty. And Bob Ray and Franklin County have done a tremendous job of getting all this history saved and put away and stored where people can come in and view it. And there's not any fees to come visit either place, is there, Bob? It's all free to the public.
If you could pan on this shot, this was all of us at a younger age in the early 90s, and this was a takeoff of the Burger Gang posed, and had that photo in the other museum. So that's me on the top with the Sawzall, and that's my wife's Uncle Bob with a drill, a guy named Kurt Mandrell, a guy named John Gully, and this happens to be Gary Kraft, who was the mayor of Benton when just following our taking this building. That was our work. For 10 years we worked every Saturday.
That's a cool photo. I'd like to get my band together one time and do one of these photos.
That's right.
Well, and again, we'd like to thank Mr. Ray for showing us around and letting us do some filming in all these places. Check for opening times. You'll be able to find them on the web.
Yeah, this is 211 North Main, and it's the Chamber of Commerce office, so they're open multiple hours every day except Saturdays and Sundays. So you should be able to pretty easily find this place open.
Yeah, and just ask somebody in town where Bob is and they can probably send you right to him so you can go bug him and make him open the doors if you're from out of state. But we'll see y'all outside for a shot of the outside wall and the outside of the building. We'll do a walk around and then we're back on the highway. Thanks everybody.